Today's walk is about how software for large enterprises should be sold from a CIO's perspective. Someone who's been on the other side of the table to sales done well versus via top of house mandate, a dumpster fire. It's the perspective of someone who doesn't appreciate the path that enterprise sales usually takes. The one that starts with a salesperson leveraging a relationship to show a sparkly demo to a well-meaning senior business person who used the product at their last company or heard it was successfully implemented there and who unintentionally sets off a multi-vendor bake-off that, like a snowball rolling down a mountain, gathers speed and mass and proceeds to a POC and then leaves the CIO to clean the avalanche that crushes the village below. It's the perspective of the person who ends up holding the bag on the legacy footprint that's being created right before their eyes. The technical debt, the massive change management exercise that anything new in an enterprise demands. All that complexity that comes from some well-intentioned salespeople thinking, I'm selling valuable software, as opposed to I'm changing my client's operating model. I'm disrupting their business. Not with my sales pitch, but with my core value proposition. And that's a huge if people in that business actually adopt what I've sold, which is highly unlikely, even if it's better than what they're using today. Actually, I might not even need the rest of the walk. Just listen to that again. The executive summary would be 2 lines, really. 1, software is the operating model of modern business. 2, new software is an operating model transformation. Full stop. You think you're selling me value. You're actually selling me VUCA. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And if you're going to do that, we need to walk in lockstep on how it gets done and how it gets done right. Okay, there are 2 narrow audiences for this walk. The first is salespeople who understand that the enterprise software sales cycle can be multi-year, an ordeal, really. Folks who want to raise the probability that all that time they're sinking into a prospect will pay off, both for them and for their future client. Second audience, the people buying enterprise software. Everyone from the people orchestrating the initial consensus around the problem statement to the poor folks who are doing the work that will inevitably be disrupted, to the people who are tasked with managing that massive change with just comms and training, which is as effective as thoughts and prayers. When what's really needed is an end-to-end wholesale operating model transformation. Okay, so maybe not as narrow an audience as I thought. On the first part of the walk, I'm going to do some table setting. Because whether or not you're a salesperson, you need to understand the sales process done poorly and well, especially if you're going to be a responsible buyer. For instance, you need to know what sales enablement is and why it's important to the salesperson and to the buyer. You need to know what a good sales methodology looks like and why it's important to the salesperson and to the buyer. From there, I'll describe what a good sales journey looks like from my perspective, a buyer's perspective. If, as I'm describing that ideal journey, it looks like nothing you've experienced as a buyer, know that there are software companies out there that are getting it right, and they're eating their competitors' lunch. All right, enough preamble. Let's amble. Sales enablement. You don't have to be in sales to understand that it's hard. Salespeople often start with a blank slate when approaching a potential customer. It takes a ton of prep and education to have the salesperson understand the solution they're selling, how it solves their potential client's problem, and how to get that potential client on the same page about the business value of the product or service, the how to closing the deal. And the jargon for all that work is sales enablement, which most underperforming companies think of as tools and knowledge, but more successful companies think of as a structured, repeatable process. So the sales enablement process is the make or break component of any successful sales organization. When that process, any process really, is designed well, made adaptable and adoptable, it can take average people and produce extraordinary results. That's true for sales, ops, tech, most anything. Surgeons who follow a well-designed hand-washing process reduce deaths. My point, no organization needs rock stars. They need rock star processes. For sales, an adaptable, adoptable sales enablement process, when it's done well, can help sales reps, average sales reps, close more deals and drive a ton of business growth. Kind of like their rock star sales reps. They are when you're passing out awards at the end of the year, but it's the process. Before I walk you through an example, let's pretend you're a CRO, a Chief Revenue Officer, CRO, and let's cover the what, the how, and the when of an effective sales enablement process. The what. Your process needs to clearly define what sales reps are supposed to do, their goals, objectives, and key performance indicators, KPIs. The how. Your process needs to give every sales rep the resources and training they need to be successful. Access to the right tools, the right content, the right coaching, and the when. Your process needs to set realistic expectations, track and change those expectations in real time, and give your reps the time and support they need to the what and the how. And all of that, the whole process, needs to be digital. So one digital playbook, so every rep is using the same words, a consistent and compelling brand message. One digital source for client insights, so you can treat sales like it's operations and get to a consistent, data-driven, not just data-driven, but consistent data-driven decision-making process. And one engagement model, designed, structured, digitally automated to encourage your sales reps to exceed customer expectations as they foster trust, every company's North Star. The best companies are the ones that realize that trust building, because I hate the word sales, is an operating model, an operating discipline. Those companies drive business growth with a playbook, what ops would call an SOP, a standard operating procedure, SOP, repeatable process. The best companies, and I don't say this lightly, treat their trust building playbooks as their key competitive differentiator. So, to sum that up, and I gotta make sure I don't fall as I go down this hill. Sales enablement is a structured, repeatable process that helps sales reps sell effectively. It's all about giving them the digital tools and resources they need to be successful builders of client trust, respectful of that trust. That's the what, the how, and the when. The goals, the what, the one unified structured process for selling, the how, and realistic expectations with a way to track that progress, which leads us to the why. What makes sales enablement? I should just start calling it client trust building process. What makes that process so important? I'll play Captain Obvious on the 5 answers. 1, scale. If your sales discipline can be treated like operations, it can scale. It can be automated into a more efficient process. Less administrative BS, so reps can focus on selling, on building trust, That's productivity as opposed to just prayer. 2, impact, which I tie to personalization, what I call narrowcasting. Talked about this on other channels. Narrowcasting, personalizing is the only way to meet customers where they are because it's rooted in the understanding that each client's problem is different. I always think about that first line in Anna Karenina. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. You're never selling to happy families. They already have plenty of trust. That's why they're happy. What else? 3, relevance. The marketplace is always zipping by at the speed of light, changing the nature of unhappiness. So by skating to changing customer behaviors of those uniquely unhappy families, your process is signaling that it'll stay ahead of your clients' concerns, that you'll anticipate future unhappiness and be ready with some kind of chocolate. 4, effectiveness. Your trust building process can be driven via data and analytics, which means everyone on the team is making better decisions and in the same way. A repeatable, structured process equals consistency around performance. And the 5th why, velocity. It's not just a kind of raptor. A process-driven approach leads to faster closes, and just as importantly, it lets you move on from the maybes faster. Ooh, I think I just stepped through some spider webs. The best outcomes for deals is a yes, but the next best outcome is getting to know faster. Okay, so that's Sales Enablement 101, the client trust building process, 101. In case you're new to this, let's quickly cover some examples of trust building strategies, basic versus advanced. Before we get to, the masterclass, and let's use examples that are relevant to enterprise software as a thing you're selling, right? 5 questions. What do you do for product training and onboarding? A basic example would be that you provide new sales reps with a general overview of the software. If you're more advanced, you conduct in-depth training sessions with hands-on practice, role-playing, certification, et cetera, et cetera. 2, what do you do for collateral and content? A basic shop, which are generic brochures and data sheets. If you're more advanced, you customize your content for specific buyer personas, for specific industries, for specific use cases. You create interactive demos and case studies. 3, what do you do for CRM? Customer Relationship Management, CRM. Basic example would be that you log customer interactions, you type in your call notes, the details around what was said by the customer when you engaged them, who said it, when, why, how they said it. If you're more advanced with CRM, you leverage that data for personalized outreach, predictive analytics, maybe some account-based marketing. 4, what do you do for your sales playbook? A basic example would be that you provide all your reps with a static playbook. If you're more advanced, you give each rep a dynamic playbook with real-time insights, competitor analysis, objection handling, and 5, what do you do for lead scoring? This is what I was trying to get to. I should probably explain what that is. Lead scoring is the process of assigning numerical values to sales leads based on various attributes. In tech terms, you're using a cube. Each lead generated is given a score, and these scores help prioritize which leads you should reach out to. If you get your lead scoring right, you're evaluating the quality and likelihood of converting prospects into customers. This one deserves more walk time. Um, okay, let's go down that rabbit hole. Here's how lead scoring works. You have scoring attributes. Each lead is evaluated based on their behaviors, like did they interact with your website? Did they respond to email? Did they download some kind of content? Did they read it? It's their level of interest in your product as measured by specific actions they've taken, like visiting the pricing page or attending a webinar or signing up for a free trial of your product or service. All of that contributes to a lead score. You rank and prioritize that list constantly, ranked in the order of priority, the priority that you'd want them to be your next best action as a rep. It's basic stuff. The higher scoring a lead is, the more valuable they're considered because they exhibit stronger buying intent. They're a better use of the rep's time. A basic example of it would be that you assign lead scores based on obvious criteria, like how big is the company the lead is at? How senior are they? How urgent is the need? Basic questions you want to answer to know who to call first, second, third. If you're more advanced, you use AI to analyze phone conversations to figure out who's more likely to buy. So climbing back up out of that rabbit hole, those are just some examples of trust building strategies, basic versus advanced. And you need to know all that regardless of what you're selling. And you need to know that, hold on, I'm going to jump over this little creek. And you need to know that enterprise software sales is a different kind of beast. It needs more than just lead scoring, a lot more. So let's get to the masterclass. Step one is marketing. And when you're marketing software to enterprises, it's all about tailored content and segmentation. Tailored content, that means understand your audience, which is infinitely harder than you think because every enterprise is a snowflake. There's this idea out there that audience research will help you understand unique needs and unique pain points and the unique preferences of your enterprise customers. But the key word in that sentence, unique. There might be similarities between banks, between manufacturers, between technology companies, but each individual company, each bank is a snowflake. You're not selling to the financial services industry, to the blizzard. You're selling to the snowflake, which means that you'll need to understand each snowflake enough to tailor your content to address the very specific challenges of that snowflake. And I'll come back to this. Second part is segmentation. The basics of it is that you need to segment each enterprise snowflake based on things like their size, industry, and geography. That's a minor paradox because every snowflake, as I said, is unique. And when you have a shovel full of snow, there's some generalizations you can make comfortably about that shovel. A shovel full of banks is different than a shovel full of retail. The quality and texture of a shovel full of snow from Billings, Montana is different than a shovel full in Dallas, Texas. But you have to be careful with segmentation because what makes one shovelful different than another ain't going to be compelling to the individual snowflakes in either of the two shovelfuls. In other words, banks are different than pharmaceuticals, but neither is going to be impressed that you know the difference. You need to know their company, their business, their operating model, what makes them a snowflake. So segmentation becomes about something far more complex. Different existing operating models. And we'll come back to this in step two. But before we jump, it's worth noting how the size of a business impacts its operating model. Super simple formula. The larger the business, the more complex it is. And that complexity is tied to the nature of corporate governance as the business grows. And as that growth plateaus, we'll come back to that too. Small or medium-sized businesses tend to be lean. They have fluid corporate structures where growth is job one. So everyone does everything because they have to and because it's more effective that way. They usually operate in one location and have one line of business. So the complexity around building trust with them is usually tied to whether you can keep up with their rate of change and whether you can price your offering low enough to invest in their growth, because they're not an enterprise yet. They haven't been ruined by scale yet. One level up from that is mid-market companies. They're usually large businesses with a moderate level of complexity. They're like teenagers, not kids anymore, but definitely not adults yet. Their business processes are a reaction to their growth, and their processes are usually more complex than they should be because they're anticipating expansion, for instance, into new markets when they haven't gotten there yet. So they're aspirational processes, like teenagers who grow out mustaches to look older. Despite their larger market capitalization, I wouldn't call mid-market companies enterprises, even though they could benefit from enterprise software, from an operating model transformation. And that leaves us with classic enterprises, the largest, most complex organizations, the slowest movers, the companies, usually global, who have the most significant resources, the most established market presence, and layers and layers of white blood cells whose day job is to protect the existing operating model. There's a cliche bit of folk wisdom that enterprise executives like to share amongst themselves about how employees fear change, how they're intimidated by it, how they look at change like it's a threat to their livelihood. And there's a little tiny bit of truth to that, but not a lot. Most employees in large enterprises grew numb to change a long time ago. Numb. It's very common to hear people throw out the cliche about how the only constant is change. They're definitely used to it. The main reason, look how cool this is. There's a tree that fell way above you. The main reason that change management is complex in those large enterprises is not fear of change. It's that the standard practice of corporate governance is designed to, it's meant to protect the current operating model. Corporate governance is the closest thing businesses have to the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm, which when I've sat on executive committees intent on transformation, makes me laugh a lot, quietly on the inside, because C-suites in large companies don't have a mechanism for operating model change other than standard corporate governance. If you're not tracking the metaphor, an operating model transformation, the kind that new software facilitates, is fire. Corporate governance, water. The larger the enterprise, the more it'll struggle with change because the corporate structure has been defined and designed to be resistant to it. An enterprise's established norms, their division of labor, functionalized and siloed, their entrenched hierarchies, all the signs that they're a successful large org, well, those signs are also indicators of their barriers to innovation and adaptation and agility. Look, no one would ever argue that change isn't crucial for growth. But large orgs aren't about growth primarily. They're about not shrinking. That's why they're built to protect themselves against the change. They have more to lose, and they put more effort into not shrinking than growing. That's all corporate governance is. It's risk management, and the risk is that you lose the good thing you got. If, as I said earlier, software is the operating model of a large complex business, if new software is an operating model transformation, then new software is risk. Then transformation is risk. I know that's a no-duh statement. Any executive will tell you that, but what they won't tell you because they can't see past themselves is that there is no tension between the need for change and the rigidity of corporate governance. In every case, governance wins because where it fails to block change, it slows it to a crawl. Despite what the consultants will tell you, there is no shift in mindset that executives need that would change this. Doesn't even make sense to ask them to be willing to challenge the status quo. It makes no sense to frame people as the status quo. That's how the problem is usually framed. Employees, usually middle managers, sometimes the C-suite, the old guard. But that's all misdirection because the governance structure itself is the status quo. That's what needs to change, not the middle, all of it. And most importantly, how the new structure facilitates decision-making. That needs to change. All right, that was a fun rabbit hole. Back to marketing and segmentation, which was step one. To graduate from step one, to finish the marketing masterclass, you need content personalization at the Snowflake level. You need a process that so radically tailors your content to the specific Snowflake that it reads like someone on the inside of that company wrote it, that they use their language because every Snowflake has its unique language, that they use their history as context, their ambitions for the future as context. They wrote it in their words. That's why email campaigns are pointless with enterprise sales, why landing pages are ineffective, why website content based on the potential recipient's role, interest, behavior, it's all BS. Because everyone on the inside recognizes content that was written by the outside. That might be a bit harsh because the takeaway shouldn't be don't write any white papers, don't publish any case studies. You should. And you should conduct webinars and write thought leadership on every channel and blog like crazy on everything from industry trends to your culture, everything. The net can't be ignored. But recognize that net fishing never lands you enterprise trophies quite like spear fishing. It's the exact right analogy because you aim that spear at one and only one fish. When it comes to sales enablement, all that stuff we talked about, like a half mile ago. That process that equips your sales team with everything they need. Well, they need marketing to a market of one. Get a tattoo of that. They need executive insights for one executive. And it's harder than that because that executive is not standing still. The expectations that they're managing, their ambitions are constantly evolving as their business evolves, as their role evolves. They can be shaped, and that's our next section. They can be informed, but fundamentally, they're a market of one. So marketing collateral, your value messaging for that first high-level exec meeting looks different, is different, ought to be different every time period. And that was all step one, marketing, tailored content, created to target one fish, one potential buyer. And if you do it right, that tailored content nurtures the relationship with that buyer because enterprise sales needs that nurturing. It's a multi-year journey with each buyer. The CIO perspective. If you're marketing to me, if you're selling to me, if you want to build trust with me, know my business better than me, know my operating model, which we'll get to in like 10 feet, better than me, and be ready to evidence that you know it with step two, the outside-in assessment. Every executive on the inside of an enterprise has a vague sense of what's out there. And by that, I mean, they know who their competitors are, who they're beating when they go head to head, and who they're losing to. What they don't know unless they recently moved to that company from a competitor, is what makes that competitor a snowflake. And that's a dynamic piece of knowledge. So even the executives who recently moved over from that competitor, their understanding erodes every day they're not there. Why am I stating the obvious? Because if you're on the inside, you regularly need an outside-in perspective. Some companies get that from recent hires, a new set of eyes. Some get it from engaging the big consulting firms who are embedded or engaged with all their competitors. I just jumped over that awesome little creek. All the competitors, the big firms, the big consulting firms like Accenture, Bain, BCG, Deloitte, McKinsey, Oliver Wyman, PwC, you know them all, and throw in Gartner and Forrester. Where else might they get that outside-in perspective? Well, they're trusted enterprise software vendors, the ones who are living the principles, we're talking about in this walk. I'm talking about vendors, trusted partners who have gotten Snowflake Marketing right. That was step one. And they understand that they're not selling you enterprise software. As I said in the front of the walk, they're selling you an operating model transformation. Remember, software is the operating model of modern business. New software is an operating model transformation. In step one, the Snowflake Marketing step, we talked about how a vendor only earns the right to win if they establish trust. How? By knowing my business, by knowing my operating model. But that's not enough. If their software is going to transform my operating models, they need to help me see the new operating model. They need to help me see the path there. And they need to give me confidence that my org can move to that new operating model. And that can't happen unless they know and can evidence, one, what that new operating model looks like, two, which competitors of mine have it and don't. And most importantly, three, how to get to that operating model of tomorrow. Not just a marketing pitch, evidence. And let's talk about the elephant in the room. You never start as a trusted partner. Every word coming from your vendor lips will be heard as self-serving. And there's a solution to that. Give me like 2 seconds. When you, as a salesperson, are having those initial discussions with the executive, me, when you're gathering my pain points and trying to figure out what a solution looks like or could look like, you're really trying to validate your understanding of my operating model. My pain points are symptoms of my broken operating model. Your messaging, the kind that's specifically tailored to me, might be perfectly correct, but it's coming from untrusted, salesy lips. What's the solution? I promised 2 seconds ago. Investment. Your investment in my enterprise. The wrong way to do it, give me your stuff for free. Give me a POC, a proof of concept, or its better marketed cousin, a POV, proof of value, or something I've asked for many times, POA, proof of adoption. I've asked for it, but that's not the answer. It's the wrong way to start a trust relationship. Give me something that starts and ends with you, the person I don't yet trust. That's a bad start, because giving me your stuff for free doesn't make me trust you, your product, your understanding of my operating model, or your vision for how to transform it. The right first trust building investment that you should enthusiastically pay for is an outside analysis of my operating model. Not by you, preferably, if you can afford it, but by a trusted third party. Accenture, Bain, BCG, Deloitte, McKinsey, Oliver Wyman, PwC. Why? They're the IBM of today. Just like back in the 50s, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. In this new century, nobody gets fired for buying Accenture, Bain, BCG, Deloitte, McKinsey, blah, 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 right? They should, but they don't. They're They're the expensive option. And I'll talk about the cheaper option in a sec, but that first investment should be an outside-in analysis. Why? Because even if I believe your narrative about the need for an operating model change, my org isn't going to trust you yet. If I really believe it, I'm going to have to get a trusted third party anyway, an impartial third party, to tell me the same thing, or more accurately, to give me institutional credibility, evidence that didn't come from the vendor who is going to benefit. Engaging big consulting is actually not about CYA, cover your ass. It's a fiduciary responsibility if I'm about to spend money, and worse, if I'm about to disrupt my business. And again, that's even if I'm on the same page as you and your read on my current operating model. Once you get that, you understand why Accenture Tal should be your first investment in my company. Not your software, not your POC, not a slide that shows your software in the right Gartner quadrant, but an outside-in assessment, preferably not yours, of exactly how broken my operating model is by someone my institution inherently trusts, who will validate what you're saying and what I'm thinking. It is a gamble because Accenture might not come to the same conclusions, or they might and say you're not the best option. But that's the kind of high bar that gets software sold. Let me say it again. It is a gamble because big consulting has its own services to sell, some of which are competition for your software. It is a gamble, but it's worth it because the big prize is trust. And before I lower the bar and say that you can do it without Accenture Tal, know this. How you price your software should incorporate the cost of investment, the cost of a recognized consultancy providing both of us, you and me, air cover. But let's say you don't have that luxury, ground forces only, and you need to play the outside-in consulting function yourself. Well, you need to follow big consulting's engagement model. What makes them shine are three things. They're perfect mirrors of the concerns expressed from the bottom up in my company, any company. They're perfect mirrors of my competitors' operating models. And I keep using that term, perfect mirror. What does that mean? It's a process of embedding yourself in an exhaustive listening exercise, asking hard questions about the existing operating model, taking notes, and just reflecting back, perfect mirror, on how that organization functions, where it's broken, and how it could be improved. And there's the third thing they do, the consultants. They arm their internal sponsor, not the CIO, but the internal function owner, with everything they need to be the face of the initiative, the face of the analysis, the face of the proposed operating model transformation, the face of the change. Big consulting is sales support to the internal salesperson. Perfect segue to step 3, direct engagement. If step 2 was the outside in view, step 3 is the inside view. Okay. There are 2 broad reasons why enterprise sales take so long. One, enterprises move slowly because of their size, because getting to consensus in internal conversations are a good example of nonlinear scaling as it applies to social complexity. Big words, simple meaning. If it takes like 10 people 10 minutes to reach consensus, it does not mean that 100 people will take 100 minutes. That's the nonlinear nature of it. The 100 people will probably take months, years. And 2, enterprises move slowly because they're not self-aware. They need to do the kind of discovery that in smaller companies can kick off after a software purchase. Once you understand that as a salesperson, you realize that the time from your first conversation to the signed sales agreement is not for waiting. It's not even for consensus building about the product. It's about consensus building around the existing operating model, how it's broken, and whether the cost of fixing it is worth the investment and heartburn. That time, from your first conversation to the signed sales agreement, should be used to help accelerate the enterprise's self-discovery, their self-assessment. If you're on the inside of that company, your time isn't or shouldn't be spent doing due diligence on the software that you're going to buy. Your time ought to be spent understanding how your current operating model functions. And as you're figuring that out, your time ought to be spent educating everyone on what you're discovering. It doesn't feel that way when you're on the inside. The way it feels is that someone at the top of the house asked for a product bake-off, but that bake-off slide deck with its feature function breakdown and Gartner Magic Quadrant, that deck is not the value. The real value is the process that got you there, the process that led you to know your own current operating state, your own current operating model. Not how internal teams describe what they do, but a detailed understanding of how they actually do it. That deck, the plan, is never the value. The planning is the value. The discovery is the value, especially when everyone from the top of the org to the bottom thinks they need new software. What they really need, and they don't have the words for it, a new operating model. Okay, so what do both sides, the external salesperson and the internal salesperson, need to do together? Well, preferably together. Get into the details of the current operating discipline. Assess current state. Interview everyone involved, every senior, every line manager, every person on the floor. Map out the end-to-end process. Not what's on paper, because on paper, everything looks neat and civilized. But what's happening in the wild, that needs to be mapped in between the civilized spaces. Is that learning easier with big consulting? Sure, because someone has to conduct all the listening tours, do the necessary process mappings, compare the results to industry benchmarks, and on and on and on. Someone's got to do it. And this is where all that time we spent on sales enablement a mile back serves us well, because a salesperson needs to facilitate all that assessment through direct engagement. That means world-class sales enablement needs to arm your reps with a tailored assessment methodology that will get their person on the inside everything they need to get to that useless bake-off deck. The sales enablement process ought to arm the rep with detailed discovery questions that their person on the inside can leverage to kickstart their piece, to accelerate getting to the kind of detailed answer that will build consensus around the state of the current operating model and the ambitions behind the operating model of the future. You'll also want to include information about the economics of the current process to anchor into some tangible insights and recommendations with some associated ROI, return on investment, ROI, and an implementation plan. Can't say this enough. That's a ton of work. Remember how I started off this walk? You, the salesperson, think you're selling me value. You're actually selling me VUCA. What did I leave off? You're also selling me a ton of work that potentially falls on me if your sales enablement process stinks. Your sales enablement process should allow you to own the execution of most of that work, so it doesn't fall on me. Or your sales enablement process should farm that work to big consulting, direct engagement, or Accenture et al. Don't let it land on your client as work for them. Do you know why they sell milk in gallon containers? Because if they sold it in 10-gallon containers, the customer wouldn't be able to lift it. Each would weigh what? Like 86 pounds? Depending on what kind of software you're selling and how disruptive it's going to be to my operating model, you might be offering me a 100-gallon jug of milk for me to carry. Figure it out. Because If you leave it to me, by my lonesome, you're adding years to your weight and making more enemies than friends. Figure it out. Because you need to get to step 4, the upward facing business case. It's upward facing because until now, the rep has been working with the domain owner, a couple down from the C-suite. The top of house is obviously aware, but is waiting for a well-structured business case, one that not only justifies the potential investment, but also maps out a plan for implementation. As a CIO, I'm not a business case writing expert. I've heard a ton of them. And to me, the good ones are like the Supreme Court's definition of art and profanity. You know it when you see it, or when you hear it, or when you read it. Gee, do you know who else is not a business case writing expert? The sales rep, the domain expert they're selling to. Practically no one in that flow is a business case expert, unless the sales enablement framework you're using accounts for that absence, unless that framework helps the team craft a robust, non-salesy business case for that Snowflake, for purchasing and implementing enterprise software. Without that framework, it's a coin flip, whether or not you secure executive approval, whether you ensure successful execution. So even though I'm not a business case expert, let's break down the key elements that I, as the audience, would want included in that business case. Problem statement that frames the opportunity as an operating model transformation. You have to do it that way. It has to be clearly defined, crisp on the business challenge or the pain points in the current operating model. The operating model of tomorrow. You have to describe the end-to-end solution and how it aligns with business strategy and goals. Are there positive client impacts? Great. Are there efficiency gains? Yay. Are you bringing scale and resiliency? Even better. Third piece, the costs. The easy part is the financial costs, licenses, implementations, maintenance. The hard part is the negative impacts of disruption. Think risks. Oh, and the other costs to consider, the elimination of the tail, the technical debt, the applications that won't be retired when your newer alternative is introduced. Think total cost of ownership, TCO, and ROI, return on investment. What else do you want to do? Fourth would be the team. Not some theoretical mix of roles, like we'll need 4 developers, 3 BAs, 2 PMs, and a partridge in a pear tree. A team should be named individuals and what they're leaving behind to do this, because there's a very good chance you don't have a bench of people waiting to disrupt your operating model. And you end the business case, the upward-facing business case, with the risk assessment. Competing priorities, scope creep, integration challenges, adoption, vendor risks. This part should be a very convincing, let's not do this, which I've never experienced, by the way. Every risk assessment slide I've ever heard is read like it was forced on the project team. And obviously they'll mitigate all of these risks. Easy peasy. And then 6 months later, they're in trouble. 3 years later, they're still working on year 1, right? Now, nothing I just said is an actual plan, an implementation plan, which is a beast unto itself. Phasing, timelines, governance, the inevitable steerco, everything. That's a ton of work too. I'll say it again. You think you're selling me value. You're selling me a ton of work. That will fall on me unless your sales enablement process was smart enough to plan for it, to provide your reps with a clear view of how they should engage through the entire sales lifecycle, step by painstaking step, to arm the team with what they need every stage. So the client isn't doing the rep's job. the company's job. And because I feel compelled to say this, I'll say it again. You need to also price your products so all of that is included in your investment in your client. You shouldn't be doing this for free. This should be a part of your larger holistic pricing strategy. You want higher win rates? Redefine wins to include everything I just said, to include the co-creation of a business case. Redefine sales to be advisory support that does the hard work of outlining the value of the investment, qualitatively, quantitatively, the kind of business case that will get your internal stakeholder promoted. That's the aspiration, because it'll look like they haven't slept in months working on this business case, right? They were getting the details right. They were dotting every I, crossing every T, getting into the quantitative weeds of modeling the ROI, mapping a realistic, aggressive path to adoption to that target operating model, TOM, the TOM in tomorrow, with a full multi-year projected P&L and scenario analysis, basically just talking business to the business. You want to increase market share? Share the burden of your partner on the inside. Talk business to the business. How does this step 4, the upward facing business case, end? Certainly not with one big bang of a senior executive presentation, because even if your business case is perfect, every senior in that room will feel obliged to add their perspective in that first presentation. And by perspective, I mean objections. Why? Because they're the final gate. Their role is not to welcome change. Don't believe their hype. Their role is to safeguard the current operating model. They are and should be an old man yelling at you to get off his lawn, because the operating model you're suggesting to disrupt is paying his pension. If you break it, his future is filled with cat food. So there'll never be a big bang senior executive presentation. It'll be iterative, depending on the white blood cell count in that room and whether you follow the journey I described. You'll have anywhere from a handful of additional revised presentations to several years worth of more meetings. And each time you make that pilgrimage, you'll be asked to sharpen your pencil in some way, in some new way, and come back in a month. What are they waiting for? Certainly not your nub of a pencil. They're usually waiting for this problem to become one of their top 10 problems, because until it does, there will be better uses for their next dollar of investment. And knowing that is actually instructive. It's why the best, most effective business cases are built on a burning platform. How do you do that? That's another walk entirely. Let's just say it depends on your software, and it depends on how much thought and care you invested in your sales enablement process. See? There was a reason to walk you through all that. I hope you learned something.